Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we're coming at you with a brand new episode, 2 new records we're going to review. But I think it's only fair that we preface this little episode, our modest, humble little episode that we assumed would just be another episode. But we've surpassed a little bit of a milestone here, ladies and gentlemen. We have finally hit 1,000 subscribers on Jams and Tea. And I think I speak for everyone involved, even for those who are not here, that we are insanely grateful for each and every one of you, for every single view, every single comment, every single little thing. Super awesome. Yes. This just lets us grow our reach, make more content. And I know we've been talking all day about making stuff that we're really excited to make. And then suddenly this came out of fucking nowhere. Yeah. So
we hit 990. I checked this morning, we hit 995. And I was just like, you know what? This feels like a good number to tweet about. And then I just popped off a tweet that said, hey, we're 5 subs away from 1K. And all of a sudden everyone was on it. And I think a big part of it as well was that obviously Emily retweeted it, and she has a very large following. Emily. And so, I mean, we're very, I think, indebted to her and her helping us out in a big way as well. But just generally, this was a long time coming, and yes, we've been heading in this direction, and it's really satisfying.
It's
to be
more
here.
than just a number 2. It means that our channel can get monetized and our channel can get partnered, which is a big deal for us. So thank you very much, everybody. Yes. That's a really big step for us.
Yes, we're hoping that'll pull through. And yeah, so big times. And as has been said, we've got a lot of stuff planned. I don't know if our viewers realize this, but we plan videos very far in advance.
Like months in advance.
We obviously leave open new release slots for things that might come along, but generally we have a very clear idea of what we want to do in the future. And so there's a lot of fun stuff in the pipeline. We don't have a record club this week on Tuesday, but we do have something else cool coming out on Tuesday, which is Jake will be dropping a worst to best video
since Tom
Waits
that I've made. Was a long ass time ago.
But this week it will be on Chelsea Wolf, which actually real ones will know is a remake of a previous video that Jake has done on Chelsea Wolf.
Pretty successful video, but I'm happy that I've covered it since, just because I've had some new thoughts on her albums. A new album has of course come out since that video, so it's a little bit more up to date, and it prepares you for, of course, Blood Moon, The Converge, Chelsea Wolf, and fucking guitarist from Cave In collab album that's coming up. So go check that out when it comes out. And also this week we've had, of course, the 1991 retrospective video we've uploaded, which is the Red Hot Chili Peppers Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which very fun video. Definitely had a fun time recording that. And today went up. I had a little fun evening with my girlfriend Ree, where we both got very, very drunk on some strawberry wine and elected to watch Twilight for whatever reason. And I spent 12 straight hours editing that video down into a little bit of a highlight reel. And everybody who's watched it seems to really enjoy it so far. So go check that out, maybe.
It's great fun. I just watched it a couple hours ago and I was losing my shit. It's a lot of fun. So
I've been told my edit on that is particularly strong.
Your editing is great in that video. And hopefully more highlight reels of various descriptions and of various content to come, because those are a lot of fun and they give a lot of balance to the music stuff we do here as well.
I snuck it past the copyright bots, I don't know, but I did.
Of course, for you anime fans though. Jake, myself, and Jen have recorded a new episode of the Rubber Gum Anime Podcast on Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time, the final film in the Eva rebuilds. That is coming out sometime.
That's gonna be a shit show, and I can't wait.
Is easily the most chaotic episode of the Rubber Gum Anime Podcast thus far, and thus it is. I've only edited a little bit of it so far, but it is riotously fun.
Well, Rubber Gum is already chaotic because the whole principle of it in general is that Jake and August review terrible anime. It's almost like, I don't think you intended to do it like this, but
it's kind of become a bit.
It's intentionally just become like these two anime fans consistently make videos about animes they hate. But adding a third person to that mix, I can't wait to see how that turns out. It's going to be absolutely nuts.
Oh, it's great. Fellow Kentuckian Jen, they were a pleasure to have on. Can't wait to have that episode up. So look forward to that in the near future.
Yep. And we also put up a video earlier this week on Meatloaf's Bad Out of Hell, which you should check out too.
Another fun video.
That was heaps of fun to record. That was really awesome.
Yes.
I've watched that several times already, just because the energy in that video is so contagious. And I also, this was a week ago now, but I worked my butt off to put out a new installment of our Jams and Tea highlight reel, which I'm very proud of.
Also
Covering the period from, I think, August to October last year, where we reviewed such albums as albums ranging in quality from masterpieces like the Microphones and Deftones to absolute turkeys like the Lawrence Arms and Idols and everything in between. Lots of highlights in that video. It's over an hour long. It's check that out.
Can't wait for the next one where you just include the entirety of our Sear segment.
Yeah, that's the Sears segment is going to figure in quite heavily into that. And I think that there was about 4 months between part one of the highlight reel and this new episode. I think there will not be this long before the next one. The next one will be much easier to edit, I think. And I'm looking forward to getting that on the road as well. One more thing is that another thing that's coming out this week on Thursday. So Tuesday, well, in 2 days' time, we have the Chelsea Wolf video coming out. And then Thursday, we have the next episode of the 1991 retrospective, which is on U2's Achtung, baby. Boy, oh boy, was that a video that we also recorded.
Certainly was.
So just keep an eye out for that one. And and then next week, we're going to have some cool reviews as well, but I won't spoil them just yet. So stick around. There's a lot's coming, and we're really excited to hopefully continue expanding, keep growing our following, and hopefully end this year on a real high. So it's all happening on the channel right now. You have picked an amazing time to stop by and watch us. Anyway, what we've been listening to, we didn't do a main episode last week, slim pickings for reviews. So we've got 2 weeks worth of shit to talk about that we've been listening to. Jake, what have you been listening to in that time?
So much music. We've kind of, and of course we don't have Morgan with us today, so we've kind of
and I meant to mention that Morgan hasn't been with us this week or last week, but Morgan will be with us next week. Never fear.
Morgan fans, you will get your due soon enough.
Morgan is 100% still with us. He's just had a lot.
I'm Morgan fans.
Morgan's just had a lot on his plate at the moment, but Morgan is. We're very excited to have Morgan back. So stick around for that.
I guess the one good way I can sort of lead off with a lot of the things I've been listening to in the past 2 weeks is that I am working on a little bit of something, wink, with a little band. May have heard of them, kind of important to the history of rock music, Black Sabbath. I, notably, pretty big Black Sabbath fan. And I just have been in the mood to listen to them because I kicked off an unexpected listen because my car radio thing is kind of broken, and now I have to basically compiled every CD I own and shoved it in there. And so I was just like, you know what? I haven't listened to some Sabbath in a while, and I plopped on Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, which is an album that certainly gets a lot of attention just because it is in sort of that golden Black Sabbath run, kind of considered that like really untouchable first run of records, the Ozzy era. And personally, that is currently my favorite Black Sabbath album. I just think that is sort of them at the height of their powers, like right as they started getting really ambitious, like stuff post Master of Reality, post Volume 4, when they started incorporating these really, really heavy synth tones into their music, and everything just has so much weight and energy, and like every single song on there is just so fully realized and like intricate. I was talking with Zach earlier today where I was like, the thing about the Ozzy era of Sabbath, which, you know, is my favorite Sabbath era, but I don't want to come across as somebody. I love Dio Sabbath. Dio Sabbath has plenty of really underrated albums, and albums like Heaven and Hell, which are just fucking untouchable stone cold classics. But the thing about Ozzy's era is that sort of first run of records through like technical ecstasy, or stopping before technical ecstasy, excuse me. Those albums just don't waste a minute. They're all like, you know, 35 to 45 minutes. They're all really lean. They all have a really like tight track list of like 5, 6, 7 songs usually. And every single movement in them is just absolutely wonderful. Like the amount of detail in each of them is just so amazing. And you know, I got to shout out the fact that it's like, you know, I alluded to Dio Sabbath and Ozzy Sabbath, is that Sabbath is a band that's sort of defined by their frontman in terms of their eras. But that band is simply nothing without the absolute killer backbone of Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler, who are just two of the absolute fucking best to ever do it. I mean, the bass work on in everything as far back as the first Black Sabbath album is just utterly fucking untouchable. That's like some Getty, Alex, and Lee level, like working in perfect synergy shit for me. And yeah, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is sort of like them at their most progressive. So naturally, that's my favorite of theirs. But I will also say, you know, Master of Reality is also an untouchable fucking classic. It's got a song on there called Children of the Grave, real ones. You might know I have a particular fondness for that one. That is probably my favorite Black Sabbath song, aside from the title track on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. But the one that I've listened to recently, other than, I will also say Sabotage, is also kind of in the same vein as Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, as being a little bit more like wilder, a little bit more out there, not quite as consistent, but great.
I can't believe seeing the pattern of album naming that they didn't call that Sabbath Taj.
Oh my fucking God, that would have been so cool. I mean, honestly, would have preferred that, just because that's so in keeping with that like weird irreverence that Sabbath sometimes has in that sort of early run of those 6 records. But of course, shit like basically, you know, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage. I have no hot takes on any of those albums. They're all literally as great as they have been canonized to be. But the one album I want to say that I'll shout out because I listened to it today, just because our friend Zach had it so highly rated, is in fact the self-titled Black Sabbath, which is the first of 2 albums that they listened to, or that they put out in 1970, which, good gosh golly, can you fucking imagine releasing the self-titled Black Sabbath album and then fucking Paranoid in the span of 12 months?
Love listening to Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath off of the album Black Sabbath.
That happened, and I was like, that sort of like came on, and I was just like, oh wow, I'm seeing that name a whole lot. And by the way, the title track on Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, what a fucking banger. Holy shit, that song is fucking evil, and I love it. Just the parts where Ozzy's just like,
iconic,
oh God help me, and then bow,
thank you, Backwash.
Yeah, thank you. But there's so much stuff on that album.
So you know, I'm so glad they made that sample into a whole band. It's really
Backwash invented Black Sabbath.
Retroactively making like fucking 13 records. How about that?
19. I don't know. I checked this because it's always bugged me, but they have 19 records, despite the fact that their last album is called 13.
That is so annoying.
And they technically have more because of the whole copyright issue once Ozzy separated from the band. So they also have stuff like The Devil You Know, which is a fucking amazing album. But regardless, the first Black Sabbath album is kind of, in my opinion, a little underrated, just because it's a little overlooked, because it's, you know, the other records are just sort of seen as like a refinement on that. And to an extent, that's true, but it's under like rated in the sense that there is so much incredible technical work on here. I think Ozzy's at some of his most commanding here. His voice hadn't been quite yet ravaged by drugs at this point. So it's a little bit more clear, a little bit more powerful. But stuff like in the title track is like it's based directly off of really old classical music compositions, and it's sort of like a metal interpolation of those, like directly. I think there's just like a orchestral like arrangement, and I can't remember who it's by, but I think it's like one of those like planetary ones, and I think it's called Mars, and they basically interpolated on the title track of Black Sabbath, and it's fucking amazing. It's so cool. And that album just rips from front to back. The only even quasi complaint I have about it is that the final track, which is basically 3 different songs, doesn't really segue between them in a way that it does seamlessly on tracks like Wasps earlier on it. So it just kind of like ebbs and flows in a kind of semi-awkward way. And the rest of it is just so goddamn good at that it's a little underwhelming, but like that's, you know, like a bunch of 10s and 9s and then like an 8. So, you know, I'm really just kind of parsing through here. It's a super underrated record. I mean, I have way more to say about Sabbath later on, so look forward to that in the future.
I just noticed that Rick Wakeman from Yes plays on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. He plays keys and synths on the track Sabracadabra specifically.
It's so, God, that song is so fucking lit. Oh,
I have to listen to
fantastic.
that. I have to hear that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna probably, because my next one is Volume 4, I think. So I'm gonna probably listen to that soon.
Volume 4 is really terrific, so that's definitely one that you'll want to like. That's got one of my favorite Sabbath songs on there, which is Changes, notably Chelsea Wolfe's favorite Black Sabbath song.
Fucking let's go. I can't wait.
Hey-o. I listened to very, very big album. Another big metal thing is I listened to None So Vile by Cryptopsy, and this album is really revered. Like, it's up there with all of the top tier death records in terms of like absolutely vital, essential death metal albums that are just like the peak of the form. And let me fucking tell you, the guitar, well, I mean, honestly, just the entire instrumental presence of the album, guitar work most notably, is absolutely astonishing. It's a fucking rager. It's not really that long. It's got like, I'd almost wager to say that it's like definitely taking after that symbolic era of death, and that it's like borderline progressive at points, but it is fucking stellar instrumentally. I have a bit of a hot take about this album, admittedly, and that the vocals, not for me.
You're not a fan of what
Lord Worm.
Lord Worm.
Is that actually the front man?
That's actually what he calls himself.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually makes a whole lot of sense, because like I'm into a lot of music where, you know, the vocals can be treated a little bit more as, you know, purely instrumental and not necessarily like the meaning, but like I don't even know why this album bothers having lyrics attached to the songs, because when I say you can't fucking understand this guy, I mean you can't fucking understand this guy. And that's not inherently a bad thing. I like tons of black metal where it's just like, it's just that this guy's got like the perfectly funny death metal growl to the point where it just kind of sounds like a Muppet. And he's just like, and it's a little silly. I can't lie. It gets in the way of a lot of my enjoyment, and it holds these songs back a lot. And they're great. Don't mistake me. And maybe you could grow on me, but it's a really big hurdle to get over. I won't lie. It's just
I've been meaning to listen to this for a while, so I'm going to immediately speed this up on my priority list just so that I can have an opinion in relation to you.
Yeah, sure. You could totally fuck with it. Yeah, on Mr. Worm. Gotta have
wait.
the.
We've
gotta
got
have
to
that
respect his title,
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah, exactly.
Lord.
Come on,
Baby.
Jake. Don't be rude.
I listened to The World is a Beautiful Place I No Longer Am Afraid to Die's album, Whenever If Ever, which, you know, I talked about that album a while ago. Jake Core classic. And that's just one of those albums where I return to it and I'm just like, damn, wow, I kind of forgot how much I loved this album. It's just fucking perfect. And I also listened to that and Harmlessness, because obviously there's a new album of theirs coming out and I wanted to prepare properly. Harmlessness is, honest to God, like only like a fucking hair away from Whenever If Ever for me. I just think that Whenever is a little bit tighter of an experience, but that is to say every song on Harmlessness is fucking great. But the album of theirs I want to hone in on is actually their most recent before this, which is Always Foreign, which is really interesting because when I got into this band, I saw the rating that had on Sputnik Music, because that was when I was still using Sputnik Music, and it was really low. So I just kind of didn't pay attention to it. And then on Rate Your Music, I look back, and shockingly, also very low, below a 3.0, in fact, which is
look, there's additional things to keep in mind when looking at those ratings, which is the fact that this is a band that has a lot of internet backlash and almost none of it has a thing to do with the music at all.
Nope. Not
and
one.
I'm convinced that they made a more low-key album with Always Foreign, which I like that record quite a bit. I think that record is underrated.
I was literally just about to say the exact same thing, Tyler, because I completely fucking agree with you. I think it's easily their weakest in their main run of the albums. Don't mistake that for anything. I think it's got some moments that lyrically aren't as vivid as some of the other stuff they do before. And instrumentally, it doesn't have the sheer bravura that their other albums do. But front to back, it's an incredibly solid album that just left me baffled as to why that this had such a low rating. I mean, it's fucking insane.
I look, it's their least ambitious album, but I think when you approach it with that kind of context, I think it becomes easier to enjoy instead of having these expectations on it. Like Marine Tigers is one of their best songs, I think.
Yes.
So much on that record that I think is really, really good. And I'll save it for next week when we review their new album, which is sure to be a capital S segment. But there is a lot of stuff that has to do with the band and their kind of, I guess, not toxic, because they're very like, I think they happen to be just very cool people, but they have this very kind of like feverish online presence, or they had a feverish online presence at the peak of their era that a lot of people reacted negatively against. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of baggage that people approach their records with, which I am excited for the segment, because we'll be approaching those records, you guys especially, without that baggage, as this is just a band, and that's the best way to approach it. And I think a lot of people treat this band like a meme before they even start with the music.
Yeah, that was why I was so confused at first, just as I was like, I saw the rating, so I prepared myself, and I was just like, nothing about this album like sounds worse, or like I expected this to be like some huge experimental or like departure or something, and it's like, no, this is just what the band's always been doing. And I think it's funny too, like, again, we'll get more into it when we cover them properly, but like a lot of the stuff that they've said that has gotten them said backlash is stuff that if they said right now, nobody would give a shit, which is funny as hell to me. But I think a lot of their thematic content, specifically on Always Foreign, is actually stuff that's revised on Illusory Walls in a way that I think is a little bit smarter, but get to that when I get to that. But and like so emblematic too is that the fucking Harmlessness and Whenever If Ever, which are at least like in the most broad musical or at least alternative music consciousness considered to be classics in their genre, neither bolded on Rate Your Music, and those are albums that should be
almost nothing to do with the music. I mean, I do believe that there are people who genuinely just hate listening to that band, but I also believe there are a lot of people who just hate the idea of the band more than anything else.
Oh yeah, I think that's totally true. And of course, we at the Jams and Tea podcast do kind of tend to pride ourselves of at least trying to do away with said baggage like that, so that we don't have opinions that are colored by things that, aren't, well, honestly, relevant. But still, obviously, check out those records, check out that new one. Another album I want to shout out today will be an album that I don't think I've only heard it discussed on one particular online circle critic person's Mark from Spectrum Pulse talked about a Canadian atmospheric black metal project called Unrequited. The U in Unrequited is a little V because it's an atmospheric black metal project, so fucking course it's like French and weird. But that being said, I listened to it, and he was really hot on it, which is why. And I initially approached it because he kind of showed a little bit of dismay in the way that video he made on it performed, because he was just kind of like, it's kind of troubling as a content creator, as a music reviewer, that whenever I'm really pushing for these acts that aren't as popular, these acts that are a little bit more independent to get more attention, that it just doesn't get the viewership like other, episodes of something might. And so that, of course, encouraged me. I was like, well, then I need to take a listen to this, because I trust Mark. He's one of my favorite critics that are like working in YouTube right now.
Absolutely. Co-sign.
And I am certainly not as hot on the album as he is, but it is 110% worth checking out. It is, I would go as far as to say, I do think it is pretty great. And we've had a good year for atmospheric black metal and black metal in general. And this deserves to be there. It's got like a really, like, the big thing about it is that it's one dude, kind of like the French black metal project Alcé, which I'm a big fan of, which if you like that band, you're gonna like this. It's incredibly symphonic. That's the best word I can use to describe it, is that it's not even like, it's big, lush, whatever. It's like, no, this sounds like it is one man conducting a fucking symphony. And those bigger, longer pieces on this album are just fucking terrific. There's some moments where it loses being with those shorter tracks, where it feels a little bit less ambitious than the other one. But this artist in general has been batting consistently very well and just hasn't broken through yet. So I'm going to side with Mark here and say that if this even kind of interests you, you definitely owe it to yourself to do it. I know, obviously, I don't have the reach that Spectrum Pulse does, but hey, anything that can help get some people who deserve to be seen and heard. It's very good. And the last thing I'll talk about is that I listened to another 2021 release, just going all through them records, as I listened to the new album by Westside Gunn, amusingly titled Hitler Wears Hermes 8, Sincerely Adolf, which, somebody who has no fucking clue who this dude was, I was just kind of like, okay. And apparently this is, of course, as the 8 implies, in a series. Like, he's got some EPs and I think one record, which is sort of like in this chronology. And I was just like, I'm just gonna listen to his music, just because I think it got like a yellow flannel review, and that's how it sort of came across to me. And I was just like, I've never heard of this dude, might as well check it out. Good hip hop. And I mean, shit, it's really good. Honestly, like, if you are even remotely interested in very heavy on like the jazz rap emphasis of things and like those loops, it's a project that has a whole lot of features, and all of them are great. There's not a single track on there that I think is lesser than the others. It's something I should probably revisit just to get a full opinion on. I'm not really like educated into Mr. Westside Gunn's whole thing, I guess, but god damn, these are some great bars, these are some great verses, some great features, and the main draw, which is the production, which is fucking slick. We've had I don't want to say a bad year for hip hop, because that's just unequivocally not true, but I think it's really been more of a great year for hip hop in like a different way, where it's like, no, I don't think we're going to have that many canon classics in the genre come out this year. But that said, of just like really, really solid front to back, like great projects, I feel like we've had no shortage of. Not every album is going to be the new Little Sims or the new Injury Reserve or anything, but like, just in terms of like, it's like the Boldy James album in a sense, where it's just like, this is a really, really solid outing from one of the genre's most interesting voices, and I'd put this right next to that. It's a really good record. There's an EP along with it too that I listened to that's just as good, actually, which is astonishing considering how much material that is. So yeah, lots of shit this week.
Nice. Well, these past couple weeks I've been listening to a few various things. We'll start off with a progressive metal band, Voivod, and their album Nothingface, which I gave a listen to. Of course, this is classic prog metal from the 80s with inspiration from the Rites of Spring ballet, and you can really hear a lot of that kind of, it's like almost a symphonic metal album without it being overtly symphonic. It's just that way in the composite that comes across really strongly in the composition, the performances of this. I just gotta say, unfortunately, I wasn't really all in the bag for this. I was not crazy about how it was produced. It sounded a little thin, a little
I'm
distant.
right there with you, August. Completely fucking agree with on this. I have the exact same problem, actually.
Oh, nice. Shit. Yeah. No,
they have some other great albums that are worth checking out, but this one in particular was like their highest rated. And I just remember checking out and being like, wow, that's a little underwhelming, to be honest.
It doesn't quite have the punch it should, really.
Agree.
And there are some, like, in all fairness, there are some fantastic tracks on this album. Like, oh boy, it's like X-Ray Mirror and Inner Combustion on the second half.
Yep.
Amazing. But I have it at like a 6, but I have the feeling it would have been like an 8 if it had like really good punchy production. But yeah, that was a bit of a shame, I must say. I guess actually continuing on with Jake's World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die, I listened to Whenever If Ever, and that was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I liked kind of, and this may be weird, but I feel I liked the album as like a suite more than I liked any individual song.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah, because some like, and I kind of had to learn that was the way I had to listen to it, because on like an individual track basis, they're really kind of skeletal, 1 or 2 verses.
Yep.
But yeah, as that bigger, greater piece, I think it was a much more enjoyable experience, with the exception of the final track, Getting Sodas, which I think is genuinely great on its own.
I'm really glad you love that track. That's one of my favorite songs ever, honestly. And so you might actually, like, obviously we're covering them, so I know we got a lot to get to, but like, I think that Harmlessness might go better with you because it's definitely more of like an individual songs album, whereas that's more like a suite. They definitely flow together. Like, that's one thing this band does amazingly well, is in terms of album construction, their flow from track to track is often seamless. But I think Harmlessness is a little bit more traditional in that respect, I would say.
What I would say is, you're obviously going to listen to the new one. We were going to make you be in that segment. So if you end up liking both of those albums, then definitely go back to Harmlessness, because I'd say that the Harmlessness is closer to the new one than it is to Whenever, although, sticks and stones. But what I will say is the new one has a great way of like it being both sweet like and also having distinct songs at the same time somehow. So it does a really good job of I think improving on that model.
Agree.
Nice. Although, speaking of sweet like albums, from David Axelrod, I listened to Song of Innocence. This is a 1968 jazz fusion album that is 1968 jazz fusion, predating Miles Davis, notably an influence on Davis. So if you like Davis, listen to this, because this is
a fan.
This is like, this album presents itself essentially as a 26-minute singular track, which is, and it's really all over the place. It goes from like psychedelic pop sounding instrumentals to like Latin rock instrumentals to fucking just hard jazz stuff.
So what you're saying is that Cedric Bixler-Zavala really likes this album.
There's like almost an 100% guaranteed chance he does, because this album is just solely about the ebb and flow, the rise and fall of instrumental climaxes. There's one movement in particular on here which I really love, called The Smile, which is like this one big crescendo that just builds up and builds up, and by the time you're at the climax of that song, it's like, whoa, where did this come from?
Fuck
and
yeah.
then in the last like 20 seconds, it just like essentially breaks itself apart, and then the album continues from there, and you're kind of watching that happen over each individual song, or as I like to think of them, each individual movement. This is an album that I think has definitely benefited from the digital age and being able to listen to it all seamlessly and not having to pick up the record and turn it around, because it sounds so good that way. So good.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, and the final track here, The Mental Traveler, is great. I don't want to say anything about it. It's just awesome. Only downside is that runtime. It needed to be, this could have been twice the length it was, and it would be twice as good. Because that really scant runtime does hurt it, I have to say, unfortunately. Because these ideas, while you see them develop, it's like, I want you to run with that a little more than you do. But it is still very much worth listening to. A bit of a big one from 9 Inch Nails. I listened to The Downward Spiral.
Shit!
I saw this. I saw this on your Ready Music, and I've been waiting to hear your opinion on this album.
I didn't know about this.
long.
I'm in rapt attention.
Yeah, I think this album is pretty great. You know, I know, hot take. Like,
August likes the industrial rock music. What?
No, but oh gosh, the fusions of like industrial, like just pretty much every possible avenue of industrial that was existing up until this point, the rock, the metal, the electro stuff, putting that all into one big melting pot is perhaps the most genius idea you could have.
I can't think of like maybe 10 albums I like the sound of more.
Like, just from Mr. Self-Destruct, from the word go, it is so immediately encompassing, but it's also such a weird album in a sense, because while I really, it has that kind of thing we were talking about with World is a Beautiful Place, where like half of it are these individual songs, and then by the second half it's so experimental and like just dirgy. It becomes harder to relate to like individual singular tracks, and more, but easier to relate to it more as this progressive flowing work of just total misery. And I love that this album, the best thing it does narratively is that it never gives you a moment's release from the sheer darkness of it. You're just getting more and more depressed. That's great. I love
it's certainly undervalued how potent I think that album is, just because it's so like ubiquitous now. That's like if I had to name like the 5 most foundational albums of my music taste, that is like, not even the 5, it's probably like top 3. That was just something that I remember listening to and being like, whoa.
Jake, you and me both. My dad played that album to me when I was like a single-digit year old. And
Jesus Christ.
The little things I love about that album. The drum sound on that record is like Titanic. It's engrossing. It's like unreal how huge the drums sound. I love as well like the song Piggy, where the drums are just going nuts. What that is Trent Reznor, who can't play drums, just absolutely going nuts on the drums, and then including it in a song, even though he doesn't know how to play the drums, and it fucking rules. And also something else that is underappreciated about, or not like fully appreciated, is that despite the fact that Hurt is this ubiquitous song made timeless by Johnny Cash, many people don't realize that within the narrative of the album, it's a song that ends with the narrator shooting himself in the head.
What's really funny about that is, you know, there's a lot of what's great about that is a lot of people don't know the 9 Inch Nails one is the original one. And that's my favorite thing to tell people who don't know that, because they just give me the most deer in headlights look.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost like a Mandela effect thing, where like I've come across people who think that Nine Inch Nails covered Johnny Cash, and that to me is so fucking funny.
Yeah, I will say, to kind of bring this kind of rein in my thoughts here, is that I think one of the most fascinating elements about Downward Spiral as a whole is kind of the meta, like self-flagellatory nature of it, in a sense, and that this is a man who's like putting his depression, his just like really just the most extreme negative emotional state out for the world to consume. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to kind of dissect and look into, just his thought process and what an artist like him has to sacrifice for this to be a work that the three of us can, and everyone for that matter, can collectively consume and enjoy. And that part of it is really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what I've been listening to.
Well, my segment will be much shorter. I just have 3 records that I want to shout out, and all of them I listened to yesterday. The reason for this is that I just haven't been listening to a lot of first listen music over the last 2 weeks. I've been having too much fun listening to music I love, and a lot of it. I mean, shit, I spent a lot of time listening to the new World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die album.
Me as well.
Like a fucking, it's probably the album I've listened to the most within its week of release this year.
Yes. It's been 50% of my overall listening time in the last week and a half.
Yeah. So there's that. But the 3 records, first listens I want to focus on. The first one is an album that I believe I'm the only one that's heard. I listened to Current 93 and their album Sleep Has His House, which is my second Current 93 album after the Inmost Light / All the Pretty Little Horses. And Sleep Has His House is Current 93, not exactly a cheery band, but Sleep Has His House is a very morose and sad record. It's a record that David Tibet made immediately in the wake of the death of his father, and it is it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's heartbreaking. It's gorgeous. It's heartbreaking. I adore it. It climaxes with this 24-minute drone piece, which is a single held harmonium note while David Tibet whispers over top of it. And it is the most fucking like heartbreaking shit, despite the fact that it's just a single note for 24 minutes. He makes it. The whole record though is gorgeous. It has some of the most divine compositions that I've heard from this band. It's unquestionably worth listening to. I cannot recommend this enough. I've
listened to a little bit of it. I've struggled getting into Current 93. It's the everything problem, where every time I want to listen to Current 93, I inevitably circle back to the Inmost Light, where I'm just like, that's one of my favorite albums like ever at this point. I think it's just like front to back an untouchable masterpiece. But that's the album I've always been planning on following it up with. So this is good news that encourages me to do so.
Once you get into it, it's a very easy listen. Like I put it on, it immediately starts with this great bass groove and it just pulls you into it, and I'm completely just trapped in
pretty little horses.
Yeah, it's much less eerie than that record and much more kind of, I guess, forlorn. It reminded me at points, not necessarily in sound, although a little bit in sound, but more kind of in spirit of a record like Ghosteen by Nick Cave. It has that sort of energy to it. And yeah, no, it's really, really exceptional. I'm excited to listen to it again. Well, excited is not the right word, but I am going to listen to it again. And oh man, it's really something. And okay, so the next record I want to talk about, well, the two other records I want to talk about are both kind of unified by a singular theme, which is that they are single lengthy compositions. And the first one of these is Bell Witch's Mirror Reaper.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Which
Fuck
I
yeah.
finally put on after months of saying I have to listen to this. And frankly, not necessarily putting it off, but waiting till the right moment. And I have the flat to myself this weekend. And so I thought last night I was completely in the dark, no one else in the flat. I'm like, this is the perfect time to listen to some drone metal. This is the perfect time to listen to some shit that I need to turn all the lights out for and just close my eyes, not look at my phone, just experience it. And that's exactly what I did with Mirror Reaper. And holy shit, it was fucking immaculate. It was an amazing experience. I mean, you're pulled in so quickly, and there's a beautiful even flow between the quieter moments of that record and the just crushing moments where it just goes absolutely absurd. Like it starts so like softly, and then that comes in and with all the distortion, and you're just pulled into it, and then it ebbs and flows around that a bit, and then around about 30 minutes and it just launches into this fiery, ferocious section for like 15 minutes that is brain melting. And the second half of it, which I guess if I have one complaint, I think the second half of it is where it starts to feel a little bit of its length in a way that it doesn't in the first half. But this is very much first listen thoughts, so I definitely intend to experience this some more. But the second half of it has this nice contrast where there's more clean singing and it's more stately. Some people have called it slowcore, which I definitely can see the influence of that as well. And then it has this really nice climax as well. I do think that the first 45 minutes of it are so amazing that the second half of it has a little bit of a hard time following that up, but still.
So it's the kind of album that just sort of needs to be a little too long. Like I didn't
at any point get bored with it at all. Or
no,
like...
it's that, and that's the thing is that like I view this album and this band in a similar way to like somebody might view like, this is a really weird comparison, but I mean that's my fucking brand, I guess at this point. But like this is Bell Witch's Carrie and Lowell, and it's like their most popular album. It's based off of a real life tragedy, and it's like the one most people seem to gravitate towards. And I'm like, it is a masterpiece. This is true, but also there's a bunch of other fucking records that they have that are just as fucking good. Like, I think
fucking
you would really
Longing.
like the one that the one August that I really love is Longing.
Fucking good.
Yeah, I thoroughly on board with checking more of their stuff out, because this was quite, I'd say everyone has to experience Mirror Reaper once, because it's just one of those experiences like a great film where you just have to have the sensory experience of this album, because it can't be described to you. You just have to experience it. And yeah, it's for an 80-minute single track album, and I listened to it in single song form. Incidentally, I downloaded a FLAC of the single track, and I just let that wash over me. I imagine it would be fucking earth-shattering on vinyl with good speakers as well.
Oh God!
Could you stop it though?
Yeah, that's the point. If you wouldn't, it would be if you had to listen to it on vinyl. You'd have to
because it would be continuous. So like,
yeah, that does kind of suck.
But anyway, still an amazing experience. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And on the other side of things, the last album I want to talk about, another single track album, but that one was a Jake Core one, and this one is an August Core one. So I planned this knowing that it would be an episode today with just the three of us, so I could talk about a Jake Core album, my experience, and an August Core album, my experience. So straight after Mirror Reaper, I went and I listened to Melvins' Lysol.
Yeah. Ooh. Fuck yeah.
I was just in the mood for that kind of sludgy, drony, continuous experience shit, and that they both fit the bill, so I decided to double bill them, even though one is like fucking 40% the length of the other. It didn't really matter. So Lysol, I mean, to be fair, I didn't really know who the Melvins were. Like I knew that they had kind of like associations with the grunge scene, but I didn't realize like how much they're just not really like anything approaching alt rock at that era, at least not on Lysol anyway. This is a sludge metal album. This is a drone metal album. This is like hold a single note for a 10 minutes type of fucking album. Incredibly influential on a band like Sun and albums like Monoliths and Dimensions.
Sun actually have a cover of one of their songs on this album, or one of the movements on this album.
Yeah, I think I read this, Hung Bunny, right?
Hung Bunny, yes.
Yeah. So yes, I did read into this as well.
Okay, good.
But yeah, because it is a single 32-minute track, I think, split into 6 different parts. But obviously best experience as a whole. And yeah, a thoroughly engrossing experience. Just the sound of the guitar, and particularly the drumming on this record. The drum tone really struck me. It was this very violent drum sound. It's not that the drumming was aggressive. It's just that the drums sound like really like fucking mallets hitting skulls. Like they just have this real unhinged violence to the tone of the drums that I loved so much.
And yeah, and that's Dale Crover's fucking brand.
Yeah.
And that is, yeah, so
I think
good
I was
shit.
really teed up to enjoy this by listening to it in the context of a kind of drone metal evening, because I think if I went into this expecting like an alt rock or a grunge album, I'd be severely disappointed, because this is not, I mean, I don't know if I would think of it as a disappointing album, but I wouldn't be, but knowing what it was and having that conception of it in advance, I was much more set up to vibe with it, and I really, really did. It won't be for everyone, as if you have kind of low patience for this sort of thing, it might bore you, but I just found it completely enrapturing. And by the time you get to the end with Teeth, which is like such a great finale, yeah, it's dope.
Like, yeah, the final 7 minutes of that album where they just completely abandon drone metal is so ridiculously fun.
Yeah, I mean, I could have listened to this album if it were double its length, frankly. I could have listened to Hung Bunny for 20 minutes as opposed to 10. Although I love the way that song developed into Roman Bird Dog. And and then that song developed into Sacrifice, which is where the album sort of starts to, I guess, introduce more vocals and be more, I guess, something you can tether yourself to. In fact, the experience of it actually reminded me quite a bit of the experience of listening to a Boris record, now that I think about it, where they do have these kind of slow, sludgy movements that gradually change, like a record like Feedback or Flood, for instance. So yeah, if you like those, then check out Lysol. If you like Lysol, then check out Boris.
Of course, yeah, Boris, influenced by the Melvins. So
yeah, as we know. That's right, because they got their name from a Melvin song. I forgot about that. I forgot about that.
Previous, yeah. Incidentally, a 1991 album.
Yes, yeah, it is. We didn't end up reviewing that for our retrospective, but I will listen to it. So yeah, that was my.
I feel bad because I've done this twice now, where I've forgotten maybe one of the most crucial listens that I had. I need to do this just because there's a bit of a tangent, but this podcast is now irreversibly tied to this particular artist now, in my opinion, and thus I must further the narrative in that this week I listened to the newest release from tobyMac. And funnily enough, I heard this album. I found it on Apple Music, and it's a new EP, and I listened to it, and then I immediately went to rate it on Rate Your Music. And I mean, I was going to say to my shock, but that doesn't make any sense. But it, like, completely unsurprisingly, it was not listed on Rate Your Music. So I had to list it on Rate Your Music because I was that passionate in my dislike for it. Oh man, I know it's only an EP, but I still put this thing on my ranked list for 2021. It's not the worst album I've heard this year. That still probably goes to Imagine Dragons, but if I got to count it in with them, it's a close fucking second. Good God, I have never, like, that is a fucking, let's see, how many minutes total? Yeah, this is 18 minutes of fucking agony. Like, even his, like, 2010s, like, overproduced EDM shit is, like, somewhat bearable compared to this, because this is nothing but, like, Tyler, this is like if Welcome to Diverse City was on an EP 5 times. That's the album. It's oh god, there's some production choices, some synth tones on here that are just like it's almost like he's trying to make a challenging record like someone like Earl Sweatshirt would make at points, because it sounds like fucking garbage.
Is it about our society?
See, that's the thing, is that this is the reason I'm so fervent in my dislike, because it's like, oh, it's 5 at best less than mediocre, and at worst absolutely fucking misguided and horrid tobyMac songs. But the reason my dislike of it is so fervent is because of the whole, like, we kind of had a couple problems with Welcome to Diverse City in its like more thematic core. And it's like he listened to that episode and released this EP to spite me, because all 5 songs are just that. It's especially the worst. This is 100% going to make it on my top 5 worst songs of the year, which is Help Is on the Way, which, I mean, it's literally just like, hey, does your life be terrible? Help is on the way. And it's like, that's it? Like, should I just wait here? Like, did God give you like a time that I can expect him to come and clean up the fact that I'm gonna like die or something? It's like, that's the entire thematic content of the song. It's fucking awful.
Wow.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
I have to listen to this now. Well done. Congratulations.
Oh, no.
You've played us all.
Oh no, I did it. I did it again. It's like Sam Hunt last year. This is all my fault. What have I done?
Well, you can't say, yeah. Anyway. It's you don't have to take responsibility for my decisions.
Tyler, I care about you, and thus I'm simply going to feel partially responsible.
Well, look, it's only an EP. I'm going to check it out. Anyway, on that note, let's move into our reviews for the episode. First up on the slab is Magdalena Bay. Is a Los Angeles-based synth pop, indie pop, dance pop duo of one Matthew Lewin and one Mika Tenenbaum. And this is the kind of flavor of the week indie pop record that's going around at the moment, making a lot of waves online and the music community, coming fresh out of a wave of slickly produced pop music that it doesn't have too many of the kind of alienating features of some of the more extreme members of this niche. Like, it's not 100 gigs type of thing. It's a much more kind of like, it's sort of like it reminded me a little bit, this might be a reference point that means anything to the two of you, but it reminds me a little bit of like Slater's version of hyperpop, but then kind of transfused with like a Jessie Ware type of thing as well. So it's kind of like, because whereas Jessie Ware has kind of got the sophistopop edge that this record doesn't have, it sort of has the kind of grandiosity of a What's Your Pleasure, but transfused through the kind of like, I guess, meta-modern slickness of some of those more accessible hyperpop artists. And
I thought of Carly Rae Jepsen as filtered through hyperpop, honestly.
Carly Rae Jepsen is exactly the kind of reference point that I was trying to think of. Much better than Slater.
It's like specifically, well, actually, the more I think about it, actually Dedicated might be a more sonic similarity to this, but like, it's that very bright, sugary flavor of that specific kind of pop, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There are shades as well, a little bit of DJ Sabrina the Teenage DJ as well, and some of the retro aspects of it too. But it all sounds
Let's Eat Grandma also,
Let's Eat Grandma are also big into this kind of thing as well. So yeah, it's very much of a piece with a lot of stuff that is hip with indie kids, and frankly that I have a really strong affinity for a lot of this stuff as well, and so, or at least an interest in, even if I don't love all of it. And so this album, I guess, appeared on our radar because the singles, well, it came onto my radar vaguely peripherally because the singles were getting really hyped up. Like, this is a band, this is their debut record, and they have been releasing singles that have been garnering online attention for 5 years now, consistently year after year. They've put out song after song after song. They've put out some EPs as well that have done really, really well. And so this is a slow swirling build. They've done this groundswell of hype to the point where everyone is basically frothing for this album. It was preceded by singles that are some of its best songs, like Secrets and You Lose and Cherry.
Oh yeah, You Lose in particular was how I became aware of this album.
Me as well.
That was floating around on YouTube, and like that I saw that on my front page like constantly.
And they've really done a good job of like capitalizing on how these upstart duos and bands make an impression, because they have really colorful music videos as well that are clearly influenced by a lot of those reference points that I've mentioned, especially on the sort of more Gen Z side of things. And so, yeah, Mercurial World, their debut album, comes with a considerable amount of hype as a result of that. And I mean, it's pretty good. It has some really strong songs on it. I think it's definitely a record that has, I think that Magdalena Bay have been really smart about the way in which they have done their album rollout. In fact, they deserve big A+ points for rollout, because they have quite smartly selected singles and they've really capitalized on this groundswell to disguise the fact that I think some of this record is a bit shallow and it doesn't quite live up to the highs of some of its singles. That said, it does have some really good deep cuts as well. I guess I'll kick off by talking about some of the songs that I like, and then we'll sort of go from there. I think that if you discount the intro, which it kind of annoys me, but I can easily pretend that it doesn't exist.
I mean,
just
and like
30 seconds.
That's the intro serves like a little more of a function than to be this. And I think this is actually an interesting kind of genius point on the album, in my opinion, making this outro the intro, in that it's not necessarily an original idea, I'll say, but I think it's a smart idea for like repeat listens, because it actively encourages the listener to, like, once they finish the album, be like, wait, does that really loop into itself the way it does? It proposes to, and of course it does.
And it's very like amenable to the Spotify nature as well, of like, you know, setting an album to repeat, or just kind of putting a record on and listening through and then replaying and replaying as well. Like, it's really smart
that
stuff.
Stream gaming stuff, I think, is kind of what that's going for in a less devious way than
I have a lot of
in a smart way.
I have a lot of respect for it. Like, and I think the record kicks off really strong with the title track. I love it, actually. The title track is great. It has these really cool string swells. I like the way in which the band, or the duo, the producer, integrates things like string swells and acoustic guitar and really punchy drums and bass that has a lot of kick and flavor to it. It always ensures that, especially in its best moments, but for reasonably, I'd say 75% of the runtime of this record, these songs are not only catchy, but they have a sense of weight and filledness to them that means that they don't feel like too skeletal or bare in the musical respect for the most part. But yeah, that opening track, the title track, is really, really good. I love the vocal melody as well. This is one of the things that I think is inconsistent on the record. I think some of the vocal melodies are great. Some of the vocal melodies are more uninspired, but when the vocal melodies are on, they're really on. And that's particularly true of this song and my favorite track on the record, which is Secrets. I think that Secrets is
great.
A capital A great pop song. But
there's an A in that word. It's fine.
Capital A great pop song.
Great.
Yeah.
Sound like
great
a fucking dog.
But yeah, it's the best song here. It has the best vocal melody on the album. It has some genuinely slick beats and musical swells. It has this great whining G-funk synth that I really love in it.
So good.
Another aspect of this album that I quite enjoy as well that comes to the fore here is a lot of 8-bit melodic sounds.
Yeah,
Like these kind of like computer processed. I don't know if 8-bit is
love that.
technically the right word for them, but they sound kind of like 16-bit sort of like.
It's
things.
very Anamanaguchi, and I like that a lot as well.
Yeah, it gives the whole thing like this real like it's one of those ways in which it has this digital aesthetic, this like digital computer world aesthetic that is it feels like simultaneously really modern, but also like kind of retro to like a late
Yeah.
2000s era where all that sort of stuff was more, I guess, novel. And yeah, it just has a great feel to it. And I love that. And this, I mean, I'm a sucker for a sax solo, but this song
Oh,
does a sax solo in a way that's a little bit more unconventional because it's really distorted. It goes crazy wild, and it just ends the song on this really sublime note. And yeah, and that's the thing I love
hyperpop
about
Pharaoh Sanders.
Dear God. I mean,
I love the way you mentioned the melodies on this being inconsistent, and I agree with that. This is one of the songs that hits it out of the park because it's got that secrets, and
yeah.
then the next line will go in everything about me. It's
Yeah.
just it builds itself into it over and over again. It's just like that when the album is on, when it's doing clever shit like that, it's fucking great.
Yeah. 100% agree. And yeah, I think that those two tracks really, really stand out to me. I'd love to hear from you guys about what some of your highlights are on this record.
I actually really also like the song in between them, Dawning of the Season. It's a little bit more minimal than the two things that sandwich between it, but it's also like one of the ones that has like the tightest groove and one of the like easiest ones that made me kind of like want to dance a little bit. And if we're going to talk about secrets, then we also have to talk into the fucking amazing transition into You Lose, which is just like that song. I didn't know if it was like as hyped, but like now that I've seen that it is, it's like it kind of earns it just because You Lose is like that is a weird fucker of a song. It's distorted. It sounds like it's in a fucking microwave, and it's fucking like it contains exactly the kind of weird out there like melodies, but also just like the really bright sparkly production in a like unexpectedly dark kind of way that I just think is fucking addictive to listen to. It's like, you know, it's really sweet candy. It's the way it's not, you know, that similar in sound or anything, but it's like the first half of this album to me is like the new Sweet Trip album in many respects, where it's just like, it's so overwhelming and dense and bright in ways that like just music almost always just doesn't ever hit the height of. I also think that the late album highlight for me is the beginning, which is
Great closer.
Yeah, I think it's just a stellar fucking way to end it. Like that final sort of segment of the song really just kind of hit it home for me. It's so fucking like it was one of the moments on the album that reminded me the most heavily of Let's Eat Grandma and Sophie. It just kind of felt like it was very much taking from that, and it just sort of like swells and builds into this chaotic fucking mess and this explosion, and it's really, really, really great. And generally speaking, I don't really think there are any like songs that I would say are bad on here. The problem I have with it is a little bit twofold. It's really that like it has those definite highlights. Mainly the first third of the album, I think, is like if you condense the album's best moments into like a tight EP, that's like EP of the year territory right there. And there's nothing that dips below like the quality line, but there's definitely just a lot here, especially on that second half, that's just a little bit more inessential or even kind of repetitive in the album's own context, where it sort of feels like it's just retreading an idea that it's already done previously on a better song. Notably for me on stuff like I think the sort of moment where the album shifts is kind of on halfway through the album, which is just kind of it's got one of the sort of synths at the very beginning that just sounds purposefully a little bit older and more aged, but it's not really combined with anything that makes it sound particularly like new or enveloping or dense in the way that the rest of the album is. And it's a very brief track that just kind of comes and goes and segues into a part of the album that I think, Hysterical Us through Dreamcatching, there are good songs here, but this is where it definitely just can't compete with the run of Mercurial World to, I'd say, Something for Two, which I think are all great
I would
songs.
extend that to Cherry, which I really like that song as well. But
yeah, I also do really like Cherry. I'll co-sign that. But there's songs like the sort of like, I think that halfway, like Hysterical Us is a little bit better, and Prophecy sort of continues that. But for me, it's Follow the Leader and Domino that kind of serve as the 2 points on this album that just kind of dip below the rest of everything and get a little bit kind of kitschy and a little bit kind of annoying, frankly. And a lot of it has to do with the way I interpret, at least the way I interact with the vocals, is that I don't think they're like bad or anything. The way they're processed is mostly pleasing to the ear, but it's just kind of in one very specific mode, and it's that way for the whole album.
It's
and on
limited.
That second, more insubstantial half, that's when it starts to really show itself. And it's also like, again, this is a synth-pop album. This is an album that's really focusing on the texture and the raw instrumentality of everything. I don't expect it to be incredibly well written, but there are points where it just kind of comes off as vague and nondescript in a way where I'm like, it's just sort of adding to the fact that this is a debut that very much is good, but feels very formless in a sense that even though it does have that tight, interesting way of looping back in on itself, it could have looped in on itself in a tighter spiral, I suppose to say. Domino is also just one of the more like minimal tracks on here that doesn't really do anything for me. I think Dreamcatching is slightly better than the 2 songs that preceded, but it's still not quite as good as the beginning or the songs that are on the beginning of the album.
What I will say is I think that Mika definitely has a limited vocal range, and I don't think that's necessarily has to be a stumbling block. I think that there would be really cool ways for Mika to use her voice that I would like to see her engage with in subsequent releases. And I think that breathy tone that she has, the sensuality that has, and just the kind of like, it has the feel of like you want to go closer and you want to like follow her into this rabbit hole world.
Yeah, it's a siren song.
Yeah, and she uses that really, really well. And again, those vocal melodies on those big tracks are great. I think my least favorite track on the record is Hysterical Us. Despite the fact that it's a single, it just has this tonality to it that just feels a little garish to me. There's a weird collision of melodies and textures on the song that it just rubs me the wrong way for some reason. And I'm sure it's a personal thing, because I'm sure there's people for whom it would really be fine, but it just, the melody and the tonality of it is just off for some reason.
It's at odds with itself. I definitely agree with you there.
Although, it has this tropical feel to it, which I appreciate in concept. Like it adds this real sort of summery nature to it. But the song itself just feels a little bit undercooked. I think also what is true of the subsequent tracks. Won't repeat what you already said because I basically agree. I will say I'm less hot on Dawning of the Season than you are, because to me it kind of just repeats the tricks of Mercurial World. But one thing I will say in that song that I really love, one of my favorite moments of the album, is there's a key change in that song towards the end. That's really cool. I appreciate it a lot. I've been thinking about this a lot with pop music lately, is key changes and how they can be like, sometimes they can be just the worst thing in the world that completely throws you out of the song, or they can be like the most amazing thing that really lifts you up. And I think the key change in Dawning of the Season is really well deployed and really adds this sudden shock to the song that gives it some real weight. And again, the bass is really chunky on that track as well. I really appreciate that.
The bass playing in general, pretty much all over this album, is really like gnarly, and like you don't think that a bass tone like that would work largely with an album like this, but it's a really great skeletal backbone to build off of these really lush things. I really do think that's maybe the most consistently great thing about the album.
Yeah. And on the note of singles as well, I'll comment briefly on You Lose, which I do like. It has those sort of 8-bit synth sounds that I've already mentioned, this time backed by this lush array of acoustic guitar flecked synths. I will say I have one tiny bugbear with the song, which is that I think that the chorus is a little muddy in the mix, and the mixing in general on this track I think is a bit off, it's kind of hard because they put so much distortion in the bass, and it gets really, really prominent towards the end of the song as well, that even the vocal melody is really strong on this track, but it gets a little bit swallowed by that. And yeah, there's just a bit of a muddiness to this song that, because it's a great song, it's just this one production detail that I think overtakes it. And that's the thing about this kind of maximalist production style. And with it comes often with a lot of compression, and that can be a part of the exciting kind of real tactile nature of it. But it can also be something that hinders the record, which is why I think that Cheery is such a great song, because it's a track that has a great sense of space within it without feeling like an empty song. And I like the fact that they're able to integrate these moments where there's more spaciousness without losing your attention until the songs themselves feel undercooked in the second half beyond that. But one last thing I'll say before I hand off to August is that the other reference point this reminded me of at certain points was Art Angel's era Grimes. This record I think lacks the dynamism that made that record so varied and exciting, because this is a record that has a very sort of singular mode that it executes for the most part reasonably well, whereas that record, you can hear the sound of it recognizably within every song, but there's so much variation between what the songs are doing. Some of them are like new metal influenced ragers, other ones are these really heavenly tracks. There's a lot of variation, and Art Angels feels like that album specifically, and speaking as someone who lived through its rollout and experienced it in real time, that album is one of the most influential alternative pop records of the 2010s, in the sense that a lot of what's come after it, not necessarily to say they weren't precursors to it and that it wasn't influenced by other things, but a lot of what came after Art Angels by Grimes was heavily influenced by that particular sound. And this, I think, is a clear example of it. So look, this is an album that does do some pretty excited things with a pretty limited palette. It just doesn't have that great consistent pop songwriting that you'd want from this. So that's ultimately where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and I co-sign everything, so I'm interested in August's opinion.
Oh boy, I wish I had much of one to give, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like Tyler and I, even though I think we're like an inch hotter on this than you are, I still think it's just sort of like, you got to really dig into why you feel about it, even if it's basically not really that enthusiastic feelings when it comes down to it.
It is an inch that feels ever long, because generally I'm with you guys that the first half of this album is generally a little more memorable and a little more impactful. And I do like a lot of the production here. I think it sounds very vibrant, very lush. I mean, look, I'm no like huge hyper pop defender, but this sounds rather nice. I like some of the crunchier, dirtier parts, and I like the balance of some of the brighter, more shimmery parts. But this album was just so consistently in a singular mode, a singular mindset, and just it felt so one note and one track to me, like to a really great detriment, where I just really wasn't memorizing or kind of keeping with me any of what was being thrown at me. Like even You Lose, a song I had listened to before and I liked, I heard 3 times this week and couldn't sing you a note of it. And that's just how it is for this whole album. It's so in one ear, out the other for me. And that really sucks, quite honestly, because I'd love to have a more interesting, in-depth take on it, but it really suffers from feeling so one note for me. I struggled to tell the songs apart. But I would also not deny that that's not just strictly my fault, although I think some of it was at the feet of the album itself. But I understand where the appeal is. I understand the enjoyment and hype behind this. I just don't really see it myself.
That's fair enough. Okay, then. Favorite tracks and ratings for Magdalena Bay by the album we're reviewing. Jake, lead us off.
Well, my 3 favorite tracks are going to be Dawning of the Season, and I'll say The Beginning. Least favorite track, probably going to go with Domino. And I give the album a 6.
All right, August.
I'm gonna go for the double Chinese satellite, top and bottom,
Heyo.
and 5 out of 10.
Okay.
You be racking up numbers.
My 3 favorite tracks are Mercurial World, Secrets, and The Beginning. Least favorite track is Hysterical Us, and the album gets a 6.5 from me. So that is an average of 5.8. But yeah, very much interested in following this band and seeing whatever they do next. Now we will
And
move.
if you have an opinion that's more positive than ours, let us know.
Yeah, let us know, please. Please do in the comments below. But now we move to our second review of the day, which is Bad Not Good are a Canadian-based jazz fusion group. They have been around for 10 years now, and they started out making waves in the kind of indie world with their jazz covers of sort of indie hip-hop staples like Earl Sweatshirt's Earl, Tyler the Creator's Bastard. What else? Oh, they did a great cover on their second album of Kanye West's Flashing Lights as a jazz fusion track, which is great and well worth checking out. And since then,
and one of their most notable works, a kind of weird compilation cover of various MF Doom instrumentals all onto one track titled Doom.
Yes. Yeah, so they obviously take a lot of influence from hip hop, but also particular alternative factions of hip hop. Became a very sort of fashionable band in the early 2010s. Put out a string of really solid records. Made a collaborative record with Ghostface Killer called Sour Soul, and have kind of been pretty quiet over the last 5 years. Not much noise since their last album 4, which was received comparatively underwhelmingly. But they are back with their first album that's not either self-titled or just a number, the Talk Memory, which is, I think I will say off from the bat, a really exciting return for Bad Not Good. My relationship with this band, because I got into them when they were hyped up, and I never really listened to their albums in full, but I checked out their covers and I thought they were really cool. But I'm like, does this band actually have the potential to make an engrossing album of original music? And that was a time where I wasn't really into jazz anyway, so I kind of drifted away from them. And coming back to this was like, okay, I've heard some good things about this. I heard some good things about the single Signal of the Noise, or whatever it's called. And so I thought, okay, cool. This seems like a good point to try and get back into these guys and see where they're at, status update. And yeah, also helped by the fact that I want to shout out viewer Brett, who asked us if we would review this, who has been very vocal on Twitter about his enjoyment of this record. And so this one's for you, buddy, because I fucking love this album. I have been really digging this record this week. I have been enjoying it an awful lot. I've liked it more each time I've listened to it. The first time I listened to it, I thought, this is cool, interesting jazz fusion. These guys are really capable players, and it has some really sort of quite startlingly great moments. But the more I listen to this, the more I've enjoyed this as a front to back experience. And it does have these really stellar highs that cannot be denied. It opens with this incredible 9-minute track called Signal from the Noise that I mentioned before, that has this absolutely shredding guitar solo that absolutely dominates the first half of the track. And it is just the most immense sounding thing in the world. I love, incidentally, the way that this record is produced. There's a lot of analog sound in this record. It feels very much like a jazz record in terms of production, like it could have been unearthed from the 60s or 70s in certain respects. It doesn't have this modern slickness to it at all. In fact, that production aspect, that kind of like how to really describe it. It almost sounds like faded at certain points as well, or like it sounds, I mean, I don't want to use a negative term because I don't regard it in a negative way, but it has a kind of like ancient feeling to it, for lack of a better word, that was really kind of like startling and kind of off-putting, to be honest, the first time I experienced it. But the more I kind of got into it, the more I appreciated that. And the sound of the instruments is still really, really great. But yeah, that shredding solo that opens up, or that Signal from the Noise leads into, has some kind of classics of Funkadelic, Maggot Brain vibes a little bit, but also so scratchy and distorted and kind of like unpleasant that it has its own flavor apart from any comparison point that you want to level at it. It's such a startling sound that it could be easy to overlook just how great the rest of the band is on this track as well. The main melody is haunting. This is another thing I'll come back to. I promise I won't go through the whole album just now. I just want to talk about this opening track, but I'll come back to this point, which is that these tracks, for the most part, have these great melodic motifs that they will return to occasionally that really anchor the songs and don't make them feel like aimless pieces, and also make it a relatively friendly listen for people who aren't terribly familiar with jazz fusion. And so Signal from the Noise has a great melodic motif, and the second half of this track is almost even better because it has these spiraling sax lines that enter around about 6 minutes in, and they cascade and ebb and just create the most intense feeling as the song builds up again from the stillness at its center after the guitar solo. And it does this second build in this equally frenetic and disconcerting place. You have these pianos going, the drummer who maintains these steady, stately cymbal taps, and all of it just melts together into this pool of gorgeous sound, topped off again by that lovely layer of tape hiss that adds this analog feel to the whole recording. And as the last sax at the end of this song, as that last sax trill crackles out of existence, I love the little crackle on it. It's like the song is erasing itself in front of you. It's an amazing composition.
Oh my gosh, what a stellar opening. I mean,
Yep.
I think it's almost too, I think it's like too good of an opening, for honestly, because it is such a immediately unique and very well defined, incredibly well realized track that what follows is on the rest of the album just, I think, never quite matches the same just subtle, I think, ferocity this song has to it, is how I felt about it. But yeah, this track, I really love that analog quality you mentioned, Tyler. I think that was such a great boost of my enjoyment. And the way this song kind of played out in my headphones was just, it makes you feel so lost and confused. It's such a disorienting thing. And as it keeps building and building, I love it. And then the moment where this song becomes a proper like fusion track and kind of gives up on its, or I wouldn't say gives up, but kind of subdues its more like ambient-y, jazzy tendencies to become, yeah, that fusion stuff is so tremendously exciting in the kind of middle third of this track. But yeah, this is a brilliant song. I love the structure of it. Phenomenal opener. Maybe my favorite jazz song of the year. I don't know if there are a ton of other.
We don't review a lot of modern jazz, to be
yeah
fair.
No, that's the thing,
which is why I'm excited,
because there's not a lot of modern jazz coming out, comparatively speaking.
Well, I mean, I'm sure some jazz heads out there would probably tell us there is, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
But this is why, another reason why I was really keen for us to review this, just to add another string to our bow in terms of things we've reviewed. Jake, what do you think of that opening track?
Well, I overall, and well, I mean, not a dissenting opinion on the opening track. Definitely my favorite song here. As Tyler mentioned, I really love the presence of the guitar on this album. Made me think of, this album in general made me many times think of various eras of Miles Davis, but this specifically made me think about a tribute to Jack Johnson, one of my favorite, more comparatively underrated Miles records, where it's a bit more like lively with that guitar. It's sort of that like Mahavishnu orchestra sort of element that's kind of placed in there. And generally speaking,
that is John McLaughlin on Jack Johnson doing that. So
the boy. And yeah, it's because I think I find myself in my overall thoughts to be right in the middle of August and Tyler, in that bizarrely enough, I kind of have the same issue, the same very broad issue with both of the albums we're reviewing this week, is that one half better than the other half. It's not to this degree on this album, but that said, I really do think the first half of this album is just spectacular. I really like Signal from the Noise is totally my favorite song here, but sort of a if anything had to compete with it, it's the following track, which is Unfolding, Momentum 73, which I just think like of the intensity of that first track and the way, you know, the interplay works. And then this really spacious, lovely, just fucking sublime sounding song comes in that just, it's like right off of the second half of In a Silent Way, or even some of the later parts on this just like really remind me of, like, you can tell these guys were listening to shit like Bitches Brew. Even when they get a little bit heavier with some like string embellishments, it reminds me a lot of Alice Coltrane stuff. And I really think it's a consistent list. It's very broadly a consistently good album. I don't think there's a piece here that's like, you know, that loses my interest per se. But I do like the song Love Proceeding, and I really like the closer Talk Meaning. But Timid Intimidating is probably my least favorite part of the record, because the interplay here between the musicians feels a little bit more stiff. It doesn't feel quite as relaxed and effortless as the rest of the album does. Even though it can go up in intensity, I still find the album to be a really like spacious, meditative record. And, you know, it sounds kind of I guess vague and nondescript, but I guess it's what really captivates me here more than anything else is its textural qualities, which again, Tyler sort of emphasized the analog sound here, and I think that is 100% true, and that's why I gravitate towards, is that you feel, like literally you feel every single note from every different instrument in this song press into your psyche in a different way. And if I had my way, every jazz fusion album, and there are bits of spiritual jazz in here, would sound basically exactly like this. And I just love that about it. And yeah, it's a relaxing listen. And I also just sort of find the Beside April reprise to be a little, I just don't really understand the function of the reprise, I guess, at this point in the album. I won't necessarily say that I think that the songs that are on the each side of it would like be more jarring if it wasn't there, but at the same time, it's just an inclusion of a choice that I don't particularly feel. It's not that it doesn't work, it's just that I don't really feel like it does anything. It's just sort of like a net neutral, and it's not really that musically compelling. Like, the thing that it's reprising is obviously going to be the thing that draws my attention a little bit more. Hell, Beside April and City of Mirrors are also just two tracks that, while not as good as the first two, I think are still wholly captivating. City of Mirrors specifically, it's like a really kind of busy song, and I just really love how it slows down and becomes a little bit more forlorn, like a little bit more Roundabout Midnight era Davis, I think. But yeah, it's a really good record, more than me. But that said, I really do enjoy listening to it, and if it's done anything, it's really spurred me on to go listen to those earlier Bad Bad Not Good records, just because, you know, this is the sound of a band or a collective of musicians who A, clearly know what they're doing, and B, have some like legitimately virtuosic greatness in them. Do I think that this is their best, or not their best, I haven't heard the other ones, but do I think this is their front to back, you know, Arrival or anything? Probably not, but I feel like they've got one in them, and I'm interested to see it, just because the modern jazz landscape, you know, it's not exactly, it doesn't exactly get talked about in wider music circles. Like, you're not going to have a lot of people on Stan Twitter talking about fucking Kamasi Washington. But at the same time, I want these guys are clearly super creative and they're super in sync with each other. And I'm just excited to see what they do next and excited to check out what they've done before this.
Okay. Well, I'll provide a nice, neat little slight counter then, because I think this is the best thing I've heard from these guys so far, and certainly the thing that I think has the most kind of compositional, holistic completeness to it. And I mean, I co-sign a lot of what's been said, but I do have a real particular appreciation for certain aspects of it. The one thing I'll say about this album that I really like is I like the way, in terms of structure, that I think really makes it strong, is that the instrumental presence on this record develops more and more as the album goes on. And that is kind of signaled by the use of featured performers on this record. Yeah. Like, the Signal from the Noise is a straight up solo track. It's just the band focused mostly around that guitar with the swirling synths. With the swirling saxes rather. But then you get the second track, Unfolding, which I agree with everything Jake said. I think this track is beautiful. It has contributions on zither, I believe, from Laraji, which are gorgeous. It is this blissful bath of swirling sounds. I love the way those kind of stuttering drums come into the song and kind of corrupt it at first, but eventually just add this hectic rhythm that allows the sax some space to go a little spacier and stranger with its progression as it goes on. It's a really beguiling and unique song, and I love that. I think that then, so you have this development with this particular featured artist, and then you get more developments in the next several tracks with the string contributions of the Brazilian artist Arthur Veracai, which are integral to these central tracks. They come to prominence on Hall of Mirrors, and they add this great dramatic flair and character to the track. One thing I will say is I think that these string contributions are greatly appreciated on this song because the rest of the band aren't quite on the level of the previous two tracks here, but enough to support these strings and let them really shine and take over. So I don't mind too much. I do, however, think that the next string of tracks is excellent. Beside April has a great central melodic motif. And again, I'm not too bothered by its reprisal later in the album because I think it's just this beautiful melody that I don't mind hearing again at all. But it has this track, the original track, has this really colorful guitar solo that really pops while the drummer is just going absolutely ham on this thing. There's such a great synergy. And this is what I love about this band on this record as well, is there's such synergy between the performers. There's such interplay. You can feel them egging each other on, slowing each other down, moderating each other. You can feel the relationship that they've built up. And the synergy is so... you can tell when a jazz band has this kind of synergy and when they don't. And it's really, really strong here. You can tell, especially from this guitar and drum sort of duo going off and Beside April, the way they intensify together, like as one's playing gets more intense, the other follows suit. It's like they're egging each other on. It has this great feel to it. And then you have these stellar organ chords that come in. I only wish they were mixed higher, honestly, but they come in. The bass returns at the end of the song to absolutely kill that main melody. And it also adds the psychedelic tinge as well because of the way that the effects are used on the bass to add this kind of swirling sound to it, stretches it, distorts it. It's so good. I love this track. Love Preceding is my second favorite song on this record after the opener. It has my favorite sax solo of the whole album on it. It is buttery smooth, and it is countered so brilliantly by this absolutely aggressive drum part. I mean, the man is assaulting the kit on this song. And then, just like with Beside April, you have this intensifying build between these two central performers, except this time it's the drummer and the saxophonist. And then you have the main melody coming back in at the end to really tie a bow around the whole track. I like Timid Intimidating a bit more than Jake does, although I do agree it doesn't quite have the fiery feel of these two central tracks. But then I think the album ends really strong with Talk Meaning. It has this great bass line that opens it up before these... Okay, this is, I think, one of the coolest pieces of collaboration on this record because you have Terrace Martin on this record playing alto sax, and you have an artist called Brandy Younger on here playing the harp as well. And both of their additions add these extra textures to the song. And you immediately notice it because you can tell there's two saxophonists on this track, and they are doing these dual lines. And at the first part of the song, one of them is playing this really luxurious kind of slow sax line, and the other one is playing much more sort of aggressively, or at least like with more sort of character, I guess, or flair. And you have this trilling piano adding its own kind of counterpoint. And then eventually you have the keys coming in too, before the whole band are playing off of each other in this glorious fusion trip. That aforementioned harp from Brandy Younger adds these great psychedelic touches to it. And I love the way in which in the 4th minute of the song, the saxophones go from countering each other to both just hamming it up together. The drums hitting this double time stride, and the band all just comes together. It makes for a really great finale. And as I've been listening to this record more and more this week, it's a great record to put on while going for a run or while working, which I've done in both cases. It's been really like, you feel the acceleration of this album as it progresses. Yes, it starts in this really somber and stately place with that opener track, but the way all these string and sax contributions intensify as the album progresses, it's not quite perfect. I won't go as far as to say that I think it's like amazing. It's a pretty great album. I think it definitely could be tightened a little bit in that 3rd quarter, but for the most part, I've been loving this thing so much.
Yeah. So I guess to get to my thoughts, and my immediate biggest dissent from the two of you is that I'm not a big fan of Unfolding. I find Lil Raji's contributions here a little overstated and honestly a little tacky and corny sounding in contrast with the rest of the record. I was not terribly into this song, I found, which I think is in a sense a bit of an encapsulation of how I feel about this whole record, and that it is a ping pong game of highs and lows for me, where it goes from one track I really like to another track I'm like, I could live without this. Unfortunately, that's kind of continued on City of Mirrors, which I found a little cheesy and overly sentimental. I really was not into that song much either, or the mood it was conjuring up. But then I get a track like Besides April, where I love the pronounced new jazzy drums on this album. The drums are fucking fantastic. They remind me of like a Square Pusher album at points.
Oh yeah,
that final third of that song where the guitars just come in and just everything, the drums, that's just a fucking amazing moment.
I would love it if these guys covered Square Pusher. Like
that would be such a good idea.
Bad Not Good cover Iambic 9 poetry challenge.
Fuck me.
That I would love to see it. And I'm totally with you though, Tyler, on the reprise of this song, and that I don't really mind it because I already love this song so much that I'm for it.
Cool.
Because it's and then Timid and Intimidating is another track I really like. I like the kind of almost vaporwave inspired aesthetics of it, where it feels like this decaying piece of mall jazz. That's
a really great shout, actually, because they've come out of the same sort of era of places as like the original vaporwave progenitors. Like they're 1 degree of separation between the musical niche of modern jazz fusion and that sort of like arcane stuff that you're talking about.
And I thought that influence honestly really sold me on this song, and I could really get behind the mood of it in general. And I think the closer, Talk Memory, decent song also, not one I have a ton to say about admittedly, but I like how it's this kind of culmination of a lot of the collaborations and influences on here. I think it's a strong closer, but I wish I felt the mood, the general tone of this album that it was going for was a little more consistent and a little more concise and focused, because then I feel I would really love it. But that being said, it still fascinated me in its greatest moments and really does entice me to want to explore the band more fully, because if like the best moments on here are reflective of the best moments of their career, I think this is very easily a band worth exploring.
Totally. I mean, you don't even have to listen to, I mean, for all I know, their albums might be great, but because I haven't heard their other albums in full, but even just checking out some of their covers are as a fun time. That MF Doom Supercut cover is really great, really fucking awesome. I listened to it this morning when you mentioned it, and I was like, yeah, no, this shit fucking rules.
If you do dig this album, I highly recommend you listen to or just want something that's kind of like it, but it's definitely better in my opinion, is Kamasi Washington's EP Harmony of Difference. It's a pretty short for a jazz record. I think it's a little bit shorter than this. And I think it has the consistency and like tone and mood that August Say is looking for. So if you haven't listened to that, it's a very underrated EP, one of my favorites.
Dope shit. All right. Well, favorite tracks and ratings then. I'll go first. My three favorites are Signal from the Noise, Beside April, and the closing track on here, Talk. What was it? Talk something.
Meaning.
Talk Meaning. That's it. Least favorite track on here is probably the Reprise. I don't know. Nothing really sticks out at me, but I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10.
All right. My three favorite tracks are Signal from the Noise, Besides April, and Timid Intimidating. Least favorite, I would have to go with what the fuck is Unfolding Movement 73. 6 out of 10.
Well, predictably, my three favorite tracks are going to be Signal from the Noise, Unfolding, and Beside April. Least favorite track, Timid Intimidating, and I give it a 7.
Okay, that's an average
rating of 7.
Wait for it. Yep, 7. There we go. So, but yeah, let us know what this album means to you. If you've been listening to it, that means you, Brett, leave us a comment because I know you're watching. But anyone else as well, if you've been digging this record, let us know what you think. Or of either of the records we've discussed today, we want to hear your thoughts as well. And yeah, stick around for our Chelsea Wolf, or Jake's Chelsea Wolf Worst to Best on Tuesday. That's going to be a video you're not going to want to miss. And I'm sure will serve as a good introduction to her if you're not familiar anyway. And also,
that's what I try to focus on in that one, is where people who aren't familiar with her should start.
Yeah, so that's good to know. And then also, of course, our YouTube video on Thursday. Stick around for that as well. But yeah, August, take us out.
All right, this one's for you, Tyler, because I saw you like this one. So as always, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Billion Box. We believe that all other burgers are
Chelsea Wolf.